I'm Richard Quest in New York, and welcome to CNN's continuing coverage of the crisis in Lebanon. In the last hour, the government has announced that it is resigning. The cabinet has announced it's resigning less than 1 week after the blast, of course, that rocked and destroyed large swathes of the Lebanese capital. Now the government has said that it is going to step down and is doing so whilst acknowledging widespread corruption.
This devastating catastrophe that hit Lebanese in the heart, which was the result of a chronic corruption in the country and the regime. Previously, I said the corrupt establishment hit all parts of the country. However, I discovered that the corruption organization is bigger than the state, and the state is controlled by this, and it cannot face it or get rid of it.
The government is the corruption is bigger than the government. The government cannot handle the corruption. That's what the Prime Minister of Lebanon just said. On the streets, you're seeing pictures of the protesters and the ugliness that's taken place amongst those protests. Ben Wiedemann is at CNN's bureau in Lebanon, in Beirut. He joins me now. We'll deal with protesters in just a moment. Ben, let's just concentrate on Prime Minister Diab's resignation. What good does that do? I mean, I sort of don't quite understand the purpose of his resigning if elections take place that don't advance the issue one jot.
No, I mean, basically, it's an admission of failure that they tried to negotiate with the IMF. They never came to an agreement on the bailout. The economy is in free fall. The lira, the currency, has lost 70% of its value. Diab came in January of this year, promising to address all of Lebanon's problems. But as he himself said, the system of corruption in Lebanon is bigger than the state. The state in Lebanon, as you well know, Richard, is weak. It is very much susceptible to the whims of the warlords who have run this country since the civil war ended in 1990. Hassan Diab is at best a technocrat. He served briefly as education minister several governments ago, but he simply did not have the power to really confront Lebanon's problems head on. And certainly what happened last Tuesday, this explosion that killed at least 160 people, wounded 6,000 and left 300,000 people homeless, was something that goes back 6 years. And we've seen that a variety of officials have said, we warned the government. We warned various branches of the government about this problem, but nobody ever did anything. So I think Hassan Diab tried but failed. Now, he had the added problem that his coalition in government was backed by Hezbollah, which made it very difficult for Western governments to extend a helping hand as Lebanon grappled with its economic freefall. As I said, they failed to get an agreement with the IMF. And now we saw over the weekend, donors have offered to provide approximately $300 million in aid, but with the very clear caveat that it's not going to be funneled through the Lebanese government. It's going to be given to NGOs and other private organizations here. At the same time, the Lebanese government could only come up with $66 million to aid those who've been affected. But we heard the governor of Beirut saying that the damage is worth around $5 billion. Richard?
Now, Ben, stay with me. We're going to go to Sam Kiley to see what's happening on the street. But I want to talk more about how the next government takes shape and what that next government might look like if it did. Sam Kiley, though, is on the streets in Beirut this evening, and I guess the first, bring me up to date on what's happening first, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, Richard, I'm on the edge of Martyrs Square, which has been almost entirely cleared of protesters and demonstrators who had been about 400 yards that way, trying to get over a concrete wall and into the parliamentary building, a target that they've been after for several days, indeed, certainly over the last 2 or 3 days. Volley upon volley of tear gas was fired by these soldiers and the police that are beyond them, and this small armoured vehicle which has a tear gas launcher on its roof. It's now being ordered. It has indeed been firing more frequently into the demonstrators, and if we get the cameraman to just step up to a slightly higher position, you can see now that they're for the first time, we haven't seen this at these demonstrations before, the police are pushing further forward. They've actually switched past us. We had been on the side of the location of the demonstrators. They're now pushing forward, and they have received a lot of incoming fireworks, as you can see. Some of them have been surprisingly accurate, falling in amongst their ranks. They were hit with a Molotov cocktail, and all of this began, this clearance operation, at the moment that Hassan Diab, the Prime Minister, began talking. They're now pushing off the demonstrators further back, raining yet more tear gas in. The demonstrators responding with more tear gas. There goes 2 more rounds of tear gas. They break up in the air, small discs, so they're harder for the demonstrators to throw back. Distributes it much more widely. It's been very effectively used, in a sense, to move people around, drive them out without actually violently, physically confronting them. And that has been very important for the military. They're very anxious to avoid a direct violent confrontation with these demonstrators.
Right. Sam, who are these demonstrators? Which side, in an environment like Lebanon, where there's no disagreement on any side, who are the demonstrators that have managed to find common cause?
They come from a very wide range of, widely spread across generations, but ultimately they are the youth, people 40 and under, people who don't remember the civil war that gave birth effectively to the communitarian structures that have underpinned the constitution of this country, that distributes parliamentary seats according to a sect and religion, religious belief and faith, rather than the one man, one vote system. They are mostly young. They are demanding a country, they keep saying to us, just like any other country, particularly they mean a Western democracy. I think what you don't see here necessarily is former Hezbollah supporters, for example, or supporters of Michel Sharon, a Christian president, and that's because they have formed a political alliance which, at least up until now, for this new government, has given them a degree of power. But that power is certainly not, from the view of the protesters here, have been joined, I think, by many others who are emotionally here, if not physically here, following that devastating blast 6 days ago.
Sam Kiley, we'll leave you to get more details on the protesters and the activities taking place. Back to Ben Wiedemann. Ben, in my weekend reading about the situation, all roads seem to lead to the Constitution, the way it was framed to share power, and the way it has now prevented any form of strong government. So, if you can't change the Constitution to get rid of the job sharing, how do you get a government that commands support, that's strong enough to do anything?
Under the current arrangements, Richard, you can't. I mean, basically, what is going to happen now that the government has resigned? The political forces that are represented in Parliament are going to have to somehow come to an agreement that can get a majority to vote in favor of a new government. But what are these forces are composed of the same forces that have been running Lebanon since the end of the Civil War. So you have, for instance, the Free Patriotic Movement, which is the party affiliated with the president, Michel Aoun. That's the largest political bloc in parliament. And they were the ones behind this government. And so they perhaps will ally with Hezbollah and the Shia Amal movement to form another government, which will really just, we're going in circles in Lebanon. And I think that's why you've seen since October 17th of last year, people saying they're fed up. They're fed up with this system that has led Lebanon down the path of destruction. They want, as the phrase you always hear, kullun yani kullun. In other words, all of them, meaning all of them, they want them to go. And what you've seen, not so much recently, but even in those areas where Hezbollah has a strong presence, ordinary people coming out to protest against not the government, but the system writ large that has failed to stop Lebanon from basically falling into the abyss as it has over the last year, and certainly with the explosion last Tuesday in Beirut's port really tipped it over the edge. And until that system is fundamentally changed, we will be going in this endless cycle of government formation and government collapse.